Now, without further delay, it is my pleasure to introduce our group panel, Calvin Grinnell, Greg Semenko, and Jeani Borchert. Today, they will be discussing tribal coordination on the Four Bears Bridge. Please join me in welcoming Calvin, Greg, and Jeani.
Good afternoon. You know, in this presentation, we not only want to show how the NDDOT and Mandan, Hidatsa, Arikara Nation work together to document and represent the tribe's culture and history relative to the Four Bears Bridges as part of the National Historic Preservation Act, Section 106 process, but also to provide a window into the culture and history surrounding the bridges, and finally to honor the 20-year anniversary of the newest Four Bears Bridge and talk a little bit about the current conditions surrounding the bridge. As a result, you will hear a short presentation by me regarding the 106 aspects of the endeavor to build the new bridge that began about 25 years ago. But also from Calvin Grinnell, who will show you a couple of short segments of the videos that were created and say a few words about culture and history related to the bridges. And finally, you'll hear from Greg Semenko, the NDDOT project engineer for the Four Bears project, regarding this new bridge during construction. The new bridge is about 20 years old now, so it's pretty exciting. So you might wonder why you have people presenting from Ulteig and a retired gentleman and someone who works for Bartlett and West talking about the Four Bears Bridge project, but both Greg and I worked for the North Dakota Department of Transportation when we went through this process and the new bridge was constructed. And Calvin worked for the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara Nation at the time. So Section 106 is, did I change it? Yep. Yes, sorry. Section 106 is part of the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966. Regulations implementing Section 106, I think, came out in 1972. The act has been amended a few times, but most important in this discussion are the changes in 1992. That's when tribal consultation was added as a requirement, and the tribal historic preservation offices were created. Here, for mitigation of adverse effects to the Four Bears Bridge, participating in the resolution of adverse effects is the important part. Note that this consultation is not restricted to tribal historic preservation offices or the tribal administration, but it also relates to members who have concerns as well. Fort Berthold Reservation. You can see here the current reservation boundaries. In the Treaty of 1851, the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara people were allocated around 12 million acres in what is now North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, Nebraska, and Wyoming. The reservation now contains 988,000 acres, of which 837 acres are owned by Native Americans, either as allotments or tribally owned. The reservation created within treaty lands in 1870 was reduced significantly by President Hayes in 1880 due to requests by the Northern Pacific Railroad. Then in 1887, Congress passed the Dawes Act, the Allotment Act, where land was divided between individuals. Each was given 160 acres, and the remaining land was then open to people outside of the tribe. The Dawes Act was another action that had a negative effect to Native culture. So the first Four Bears Bridge, there was a 4-day celebration attended by an estimated 8,000 to 10,000 people. We don't have celebrations like that today for infrastructure projects, and it makes me think about changes to our society over the years, and now perhaps we take transportation and access for granted. But think about back before there was a safe and secure crossing of the river. There were ferries, and people drove carts, horse-drawn carts across. but sometimes, especially in the spring, that could be difficult. They had a rodeo and a carnival and a powwow in association with the celebration. The dam forever changed the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara people's way of life. The floodwaters essentially destroyed the socioeconomic infrastructure of the people, their homes, their communities, hospitals, school system, headquarters, sawmills, and connecting roads. Until the dam, the three affiliated tribes preserved many distinct cultural traits through the early reservation period, despite conscious efforts by the Department of War and Christian missionaries to eradicate native beliefs and practices. Note that the Department of War formerly was the overseeing body for Indian affairs. More than 90% of the population was relocated as a result of the dam. Traditional communities were torn apart by the forced moves. The tribes feared if they failed to consent to outlined terms, they would receive less adequate compensation in the future. In tears, Chairman George Gillette consented to the coercive piece of legislation. Quote, "The truth is, as everyone knows, our Treaty of Fort Laramie and our Constitution are being torn to shreds by this contract." The second Forebears Bridge used the Elbow Woods Forebears Bridge at its near center to accommodate navigation on what was the Missouri River Channel, the deepest part of the lake in this area. Residents who were dealing with this monumental change were heartened to see their old bridge as it brought back memories of better days. I remember driving over this bridge in a big work truck, and it was one of our newer ones. I worked for the University of North Dakota at the time and had big mirrors. And I was meeting a semi, and I kind of just crunched down, and I thought, oh gosh, I think I'm going to lose a mirror. I think it was this close. So I heard from Greg it was 23 feet wide, and so we didn't quite have 12-foot driving lanes. When larger loads were crossing the bridge, the Highway Patrol was contacted to keep oncoming traffic off the bridge. It took a lot of time for the Highway Patrol, and people had to wait. As part of the mitigation, NDDOT documented the second Forebears Bridge. I was part of that effort. We did historic American engineering record documentation that used, at the time, and I'm not sure if that's still the requirement, but large format negatives. So the negatives were in these big metal containers, and they were about this big. And so, and Gary Redman, who was our photographer at the time, he'd carry the big camera on a tripod. And when he looked through that, he was seeing things backwards and upside down. If you can imagine taking good photos that way. And I would carry these sacks. So you can see this walking path down the middle. And there were these grates that were balanced on these lips that then had a railing on them. And I'd have to lift up my bags of film over the top of that. And sometimes when you stepped on a grate, it would kind of wobble. Now, I'm afraid of heights. So you can imagine, I get a rush of adrenaline just talking about it right now. It was crazy. I bet we went out there at least 10 different times. But luckily, the day that Gary went up on the crane that was sitting on the barge, and it was a windy day, and they were trying to get pictures from up above, I had something come up, so Greg Wormers filled in for me. Boy, was that a good deal, because it was awful from what I hear. So we did that. You can see how narrow the bridge was. And I'm not sure if you can tell on the photo of the right, but we would get to the end of the deck truss, and that through truss portion from Elbow Woods would be up above. We'd just be standing, looking at the water. It's a little scary, exhilarating. The photo on the left is of the second and third Forebears bridges during construction of the new bridge. Note the damage to some of the members on the picture in the right from high and perhaps unsecured loads. So the cultural resource issues were the National Register of Historic Places eligible bridge, the dancing grounds that were situated on the logical location for staging area for the new bridge construction, and the interest of the Native communities, particularly the elders, in retaining that second bridge due to their connection with that middle span from Elbow Woods and memories of their treasured past. And the NDDOT did consider that option of retaining that second bridge for the purposes of walking and, excuse me, holding celebrations maybe, but in looking at that, it would still be expensive. You'd still have to maintain and inspect the bridge and make sure that it was safe to hold a bridge full of people, which is, I suppose, about like cars traveling across it, so it wasn't really feasible. The NDDOT made a video on the history and construction of the Forebears bridges as part of those mitigative measures. And I think that construction video is available on YouTube. I didn't look it up. Beautiful, isn't it? This is our new bridge. Gorgeous photo. This bronze plaque describes all three Forebears bridges. It was designed by Kent Good, who was my boss at the NDDOT for a time and a lifelong friend. This plaque sits on the southwest edge of the interpretive area, just by the Forebears Casino and Hotel. The area is framed by the portals from the Elbow Woods Forebears Bridge. There is interpretation of features of the third bridge between these portals. And so these are the medallions that are on the new bridge along the walking path. And they were designed by elders in each tribe in discussions with Mr. Denby Deegan, who was an architect and member of the tribe, who has since passed, and his son Justin is a filmmaker and a friend. A view of the new bridge. Its design was developed through a context-sensitive approach involving many, including the North Dakota State Historical Society, the tribe, tribal members, and others. Amazing walking path of the bridge, and a bridge rail on the south that allows people crossing to actually see the water, not a Jersey barrier bridge. I didn't say that. We worked with some of the same people to create the text which interprets what each medallion means. It was an interesting process. Our first invitation fell flat, and then, of course, we realized that we needed to offer food. And so we sent out a new invitation to come for a meal and then have discussions to interpret all of these medallions that are along the walking path. Here's an example of text interpreting images displayed on the bridge, and I want to just read you a little bit from this one, if I can. The three tribes, Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara, formed a new settlement by 1845 due to the smallpox epidemic. Their new settlement was named Lycofishhook Village. When the village was established, Euro-American fur traders from competing companies established two trading posts at opposite ends of the village. But during the 1860s and 70s, the tribes were becoming more dependent on government allotments due to the reduced number of bison herds and other animals important for trade. This led to a decline in the standard of living, with the increasingly squalid conditions becoming prevalent at Lycofishhook. Unrest began to manifest between tribal members. Crow flies high. I gotta move this down a little bit. Crow Flies High and his followers were forced to depend on the U.S. government for food rations and forced to change their traditional lifestyle to fit within the confines of the Indian reservation. Crow Flies High, with a group of Hidatsa, broke away from the tribe into a self-imposed exile in the early 1870s. He and his band moved to the confluence of the Missouri and Yellowstone rivers near the site of the then abandoned Fort Union. Fort Berthold was established in 1866 at the confluence area, and the Crow Flies High Band was able to build an initial settlement nearby between 1869 and 1872. This band was the Doksha, and you can correct me if I'm saying it wrong. And they continued their traditional ways of hunting, trading, and growing limited amounts of crops. The soldiers stationed at Fort Buford also were able to provide some protection from the Sioux tribes. Ethnographic accounts describe a substantial village at this site with 7 log cabins and 23 earth lodges. In the summer of 1884, the Crow Flies High Band moved down the Missouri River from the site near Fort Buford to the site that's known as the Crow Flies High Village, which is near the mouth of the Little Knife River. This village was located on a high bluff overlooking the Missouri River to the north. By 1893, game had become scarce, and the Crow Flies High Band had little choice but to accept government food rations. However, the United States Indian agent would not provide the band with rations unless they moved back to the Fort Berthold Indian Reservation and accepted land allotments. The band returned to the reservation in 1894 under U.S. escort. Okay. Aha. There we go. And I'm on the right one. Sorry about that. We also consulted with the Antelope Society and provided funding for development of the new powwow grounds. This was necessary due to the need for the staging area near the bridge. The only area to serve the purpose was on top of the original dancing grounds developed in the early 1950s. Now, I remember going to powwows there, and I can still remember sitting late one evening on the ground, and I wasn't too far away from the drum, maybe half the distance to that wall, and I could feel that drum beat taking over my heartbeat. And I just thought it was the greatest thing ever. I love this view of the changes through time, our 2 bridges side by side. Another mitigative effort was development of 4 videos titled Crossing the Water. As part of this effort, we interviewed over 30 elders from the MHA Nation and community. We put transcripts of these interviews and each recorded video interview and the 4-disc that was developed, the 4-disc titled Crossing the Water set, into a large binder, and we distributed that to state libraries, the North Dakota Historical Society, and our tribal partners. These interviews are quite captivating, and one of my favorites was told by Fred Baker, and he talks about children on a really cold morning walking to school, and you could hear the crunch of the snow, and there wasn't wind because the smoke from the cabins was going straight up, and a man walked out of the barn and started singing, and another walked out of the barn and sang with him, and then it almost sounded like the drum, and I think it's a great memory of that past before the dam and the second bridge. These videos are the bridge at Elbow Woods, that's my favorite, on the river, the bridge west of Newtown and the Garrison Dam, and the new Four Bears Bridge. All 4 videos are available on YouTube. Just search for NDDOT Crossing the Water. I'm going to play this. It's a little bit hard to hear, but I think it's worth the effort. Okay.
Was, from things I've read and things I've studied and things I've heard from listening to different people, that was a pretty good time in our life. We had been moved from like a fish hook. Some of us went over to Fort Buford. They brought us all back and forced us to live on the Fort Berthold Reservation. And the three tribes were very industrious people and were also very self-sufficient. And so we immediately continued to live our village lifestyle. We lived close together. And I guess one of my memories of living in Independence is one morning going to school, and there used to be a group of houses where everybody had livestock in those days. They had some cattle, they had some horses, and cleaning the barn and keeping these animals was really a chore that everybody took very seriously. So I remember one morning walking to school. In this wintertime, the snow was cold, and you crunch, crunch, crunch as you're walking along. And I remember somebody started singing a song. Remember those days when it was really cold and a still day that the smoke from these log houses went straight up. And that was one of those mornings. And I remember somebody was singing. And as he was singing, somebody else joined him, just like they were at a drum or something. And I remember there must have been a couple other folks that were out there. There were probably about 4 guys that were probably cleaning barn or doing something outside, and they all started to sing.
So I'll introduce Calvin Grinnell. He's got a couple of videos to show first that are from those that 4 video set.
Let us create land out of this substance and living creatures, and let us make the land productive, that it may bear fruit for the subsistence of the creatures that we shall create. Let us choose, therefore, the directions where each shall begin. So Lone Man chose the northern part, and the first creator the southern, and they left a space between in the water, which is the Missouri River. Then, after agreeing to compare results, they began the creation. The Lone Man and the first creator divided up the land and put the Missouri River in the middle, so it serves as a sort of a dividing line. And each took a portion of the land to create. And subsequently, it even, I think, first creator says that he doesn't know where he came from, who his parents were, but he thought that he had come from the water, so it shows that our origins is one of our creation heroes has his genesis in the water. So, yeah, his figure is very majorly, it's a major part of our spiritual existence. It's been attributed as a huge snake that was one of our culture heroes at one time, was a human, but somehow had turned into a snake, evolved into a snake because of his actions, and was put in the water by his brother. And it said that his tail, I think, is up by the Yellowstone, and that his head is down by the Grand River or something like that. So it encompasses the entire lake. But the Missouri River is our grandfather, so an elder, so we consider it a relative in that sense, in that spiritual sense. So we've always been village people, and we've always lived along this Missouri. So spiritually, before the dam, it was obviously a source of water, and as such, it was a necessary ingredient. And if you'll notice, or I don't know if you're aware of this, but the Missouri River and its tributaries that fed into it were major, I guess, our major highways. There are some roads that went, or some trail that maybe it went across the prairie, the major prairies of North Dakota, but I think there were few and far between, and there was a network, I'm sure. Little Missouri was another one. And spiritually, they held a major role. The Missouri River held a major role in our creation stories, which I shared with you.
And Calvin? It's on.
Good afternoon. I was a cultural resource specialist for about 20 years, a historian for the tribe for about another 10 years. So that's how I came to know this land. I grew up in Newtown. And the picture we see of the bridge there, I remember it was very narrow. And it was a little treacherous too. I mean, if you were a big truck coming from the other direction and you had to pass it, it's like Jeani said, you had to cringe a little bit and hope you made it. So fortunately, I don't remember of any bad accidents, but it's something that sticks in your mind as traveling this bridge. So as we grew up, from my perspective, it was the only thing I knew was living near the Missouri and crossing this dam. So I grew up with it. I didn't see the destruction of the old bridge. I don't know, I was doing something else at the time and I missed it. But I remember people telling me they were crying. They cried when they saw that bridge go down. And I kind of don't blame them because it meant so much to them. They grew up with it too. Like Jeani said, it was established first near Elba Woods. And the center span was taken apart and brought up here, or brought up to the Newtown area. And it was the center part of the new bridge, or bridge number 2, I guess. And there were endings on each end that extended it. And those had catwalks, but you weren't able to go underneath the main bridge. So you can just go out to where the end of the bridge came to. So we used to walk on there, and some of them would jump off. I don't think I ever did, but and it was On the other end of the bridge was where the little shell powwow was established in the 50s. And then they had to move that to the center of the Four Bears Recreation Area. And the NDDOT helped us construct another powwow grounds. It was a pretty modern building, and that's the way it is now. So this is how I remember the Four Bears Bridge. And this new one, 20 years now. Yeah. It's a lot wider, and it's a walking path on the right or on the north side of it. And that's where all the medallions are. Pretty nice medallions. So I think they did a good job in establishing this bridge for us, creating a new bridge. I think it's one of the only culturally sensitive bridges that you'll see.
Okay, well, then Greg has a few things to say.
I'm Greg Semenko. I'm with Bartlett West now. I've previously been with NDDOT while this project was being built. I'd previously worked in the oil field, and there's a picture of the new bridge now. Go to the next one, Jeani. That's what traffic used to look like on the old bridge when you went down the road. And then the next slide will show you what we used to do, and we moved work over rig across. We'd run across the bridge, shut traffic, hold it, and we'd move across the bridge. And you can see he's straddling that yellow line pretty good. Okay. During the construction of the new bridge, we were only 75 feet away. We had a 23-foot wide old bridge. The new bridge is got 40 feet, two 12-foot driving lanes, two 8-foot shoulders on each side, plus a walking lane path on it. It's 4,517 feet long if you're curious. I don't know. The other interesting thing is the PCN number for this project was 34. And look now where we're at now with PCNs. We're like a long way out there. All these symbols on the bridge had to be agreed to by the 3 tribes, and within each tribe there's several different clans. And all those clans came together to help the tribe decide what they were looking for. Then the tribes came together, the 3 of them, to give their okay to what was put up there. On the side of the bridge, you'll see these medallions here with the animals. And you'll notice the colors on here. Each one of those colors is in a different quadrant, because each color is spiritual to the tribes. And during one of the meetings, the contractor was happy. He says, "Yep, we ordered all the medallions for the side of the bridge." And I happened to ask, I said, "You didn't order them all the same color for both sides?" "Well, yeah." He says, "You're going to be in trouble. Because if you notice, the blue has to be to the west, the red has to be to the east, the white and the yellow are always up and down." Where they're located was what the tribes had to agree to. So being an engineer, going through all these meetings on the design of this and listening to all these cultural things, you sit there and you wonder, why do I need to know this? That day was the day I needed to know it. That's why we kind of need to go to these cultural things, because there's agreements made ahead of time that we need to follow through at the construction side of it. Had I not been there, we may have been barking up the wrong tree at the wrong time. This is a picture of the portal that was removed and replaced in the grounds right next to in the plaza. And there's a picture of the demo of the old bridge, one of the first under truss section that was taken down. And that's a picture of the grand opening of the new bridge, which was roughly 50 years after the grand opening of the old bridge, to the date, as a matter of fact.
So, a special thanks, of course, to the North Dakota Department of Transportation and the Mandan Hidatsa Arikara Nation. Are there any questions? I know we're running a little long, sorry.
Is the new bridge higher than the old bridge? It was constructed so that there was a channel within the deeper portion of it. It was higher, and both ends were a little bit higher also underneath. So there was more clearance for boating, for the sailboats through that area.
It was scary high. Oh, oh man. Well, if there's nothing else, thank you so much.